Have you ever felt emotionally drained, lacked motivation, and felt a sense of shame associated with it? As you lie on your bed and look up at the ceiling, you cannot rid yourself of the overwhelming feeling of exhaustion that's been bothering you for weeks. This feeling has been impacting your daily life, and although you tell yourself that you are not lazy, you still cannot understand why you lack motivation. You keep hearing a voice in your head urging you to push yourself harder or reminding you that you should have more energy. It's frustrating because you know you're doing your best, but the burden on your shoulders seems to be increasing every day. But did you know there could be psychological reasons behind your fatigue that couldn't be seen on the surface? Here are some. 1. Emotional drain from going through change. Have you ever wondered why significant life changes like breakups, divorces, job losses, or relocations can feel so overwhelming? According to Dr. Sarah Johnson, a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma and life transitions, significant life changes can deeply impact your emotional well-being. For example, breakups, divorce, job loss, or relocation can trigger intense emotions like heartbreak, grief, and anxiety, depleting your emotional resources and leaving you feeling tired and unmotivated. Change can leave you emotionally drained and unmotivated. Others may misunderstand and think you're being lazy, not realizing the deep emotional toll it's taking on you. It's normal to wish for empathy and support during this challenging transition. Make self-care a priority as you navigate through this challenge. Take small steps at your own pace and don't hesitate to ask for help when needed. You are capable of overcoming this and becoming stronger. 2. Toxic relationships or a negative environment. How has your experience been with your relationships or environments? You know, Dr. Elizabeth Brooks, a renowned psychologist who specializes in how toxic relationships impact your mental health, has a lot to say on the subject. She explains that being in a toxic relationship or surrounded by a negative environment can have profound effects on your mental and emotional well-being. It's not just the constant stress, conflicts, and negativity, but also how it can leave you emotionally fatigued even if you don't appear physically tired. According to Dr. Brooks, others may not fully understand the toll that toxic relationships or environments take on your mental health and emotional state. Feeling unmotivated or emotionally exhausted can be misinterpreted as laziness, when in reality, it's the constant negativity and stress that drains your mental and emotional resources. Coping with these draining effects can be really tough. Some people can see how emotionally draining it is to be in a toxic relationship, even when others dismiss it as laziness without realizing the deep emotional toll it takes on you. Remember, your feelings are valid and you're not alone. You have the strength to recognize and acknowledge the impact of the toxic relationship on your well-being. Prioritize your mental health and well-being. Practice self-care and distance yourself from toxic relationships. Surround yourself with understanding and supporting individuals who see and understand your emotional strain. You are stronger than you think. You're capable of healing and moving towards a healthier, happier life. Just take it one step at a time and be kind to yourself. You deserve it. 3. Psychological health conditions. Have you ever experienced a lack of motivation or felt fatigued due to mental health challenges? Dr. James Thompson, a renowned neuroscientist specializing in psychological health, explains that mental health conditions can have a profound impact on a person's energy levels and motivation. Conditions like depression, chronic stress, or anxiety can cause constant fatigue and make everyday tasks feel overwhelming. The body's stress response, triggered by these conditions, can disrupt normal psychological functions, leading to fatigue and decreased ability to carry out daily tasks. Sadly, not everyone understands these underlying mental health conditions, and fatigue may be misinterpreted as lazy or lack of effort, which can further worsen the challenges faced by those with these conditions. It's understandable that sometimes you're going through a tough time with your mental health. Even simple tasks can feel overwhelming, and low energy level makes it hard to keep up with responsibilities. Remember, you're not alone, and it's important to prioritize self-care and seek support from empathetic and understanding individuals. Your journey towards better mental health is valid and deserving of support. Keep taking small steps, like practicing self-compassion towards healing and self-care. You're strong and capable of overcoming this challenge. Can you relate to any of these signs? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and share it with your friends and family. We appreciate your support and hope you continue to tune in for more insightful content. you're looking for a cuddly companion that brings positivity and mental wellness to your daily life, get your very own Sai.
This is Karen with NuclearRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. You are special. And my guest today, Sharina Oil from Podmatch.com. Did I get the first name right?
Shariana.
Shariana. Okay.
Yes.
I read it wrong.
That's okay.
Well, we met through Podmatch.com. And what drew me to inviting Shariana on as a guest, especially for Avoid the Maze, You Are Special. She talks about emotional detox. And I know for myself, I have held on to a lot of garbage throughout my life. And sadly, that garbage sometimes comes out at the wrong time and in the wrong manner. And because of that, I've had to learn how to cleanse myself. I know I'm not doing it as well as I would like. So for all of you listeners out there, especially, I'm going to say, especially moms and dads who are bringing everything they've learned into the raising of their children, maybe we can learn something about energizing our emotions and getting rid of the bad stuff. So, Juliana, take us on a tour.
Well, thanks for having me. So I'll start with, I had many questions myself in terms of an emotional detox, and I started the research back in 2016. I, at that point, had written 6 books, and I started wondering more and more about emotions, how they get processed, what happens when we don't process them. And the information out there on emotional detox was very loose, really related more to a physical detox. And I think that's what most people relate when they think of a detox, they think of a physical one. And so that's when I decided, well, I'm going to write about it. I'm kind of define what this means. and so when I say this, it's my own development of what is an emotional detox. And the first part that I developed was, well, what is it based on? There's got to be a foundation, because we all have tools and strategies, and I had many of them in my life. But what I've learned is, if you don't have a launching pad, a foundation, it can be really tricky. And so you have to decide, what is my foundation? And for emotional detox, I created pillars. And one of those pillars is all your emotions matter, processing them matters more. So they all count. They're all important. That, including the guilt, including the shame, the fear.
Today, we're going to talk about the science of self-control and evidence-based techniques to boost your self-control. So the basic problem here is that you want to do stuff, right? You want to eat healthier, you want to exercise more, you want to wake up on time, you want to go to bed on time. You want to spend less time on your phone. But the problem is that you don't really listen to you, right? And so what we end up doing is we try to find solutions for our problems. And you'll maybe do a Google search or watch a YouTube video about how to eat healthy or how to actually go to bed on time. Hey y'all, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Babbel. Babbel is the top language learning app worldwide, and I can't advocate for it enough. Part of what I love about Babbel is that it's designed by real language teachers, so they know exactly what a student needs to learn a language. And they also use evidence-based techniques to optimize learning in a short amount of time. I really wish that I had access to this when I was actually in med school, because they make learning so easy. I'm learning a lot of very common phrases that doctors would actually need to use to communicate with their patients. I, for example, am learning medical Spanish, which I wish I had access to when I was actually in med school. So I'm learning how to say beba agua y descanse, which means drink water and rest. The last thing that I really love about Babbel is that it's very accessible in all of the in-between spaces in my life. So part of the problem is that learning a new language takes a lot of time, but I love that I can replace the boring, wasteful stuff that I do on my phone with actually learning medical Spanish. So I can't thank Babbel enough for sponsoring today's video, and strongly recommend that y'all check out the awesome offer, which is 60%.
Naglantaw man jud ko video per productive na video para background music. Nag-rest lang po gikapoy ko.
Off your subscription in the link below. Thank you once again to Babbel for sponsoring today's video and making mental health content on the internet free. And so we end up up trying to fix these problems individually. But in the back of your mind, you probably know that if you could just be better at controlling yourself, all of these things would get better. If you were better at self-control, you'd be able to eat healthy, you'd be able to be more motivated at work, you'd be able to suppress and control your burnout. And so then we end up doing things to try to boost our self-control. Like sometimes we'll even take supplements that are supposed to be cognitive enhancers, or we'll do really hard things like take cold showers. Because taking a cold shower is hard, and if I can force myself to do it, then I should be able to force myself to do all of the other stuff. And it turns out, though, that that doesn't really work. Because if cold showers increased everybody's self-control, then we'd have a lot of data supporting that, and everyone would be taking cold showers. It turns out that if you look at it scientifically, what cold showers make
Ambak ni mo.
you good at is
Ikaw may mo bit-bit sa ato. Yahay ako ni mo.
about self-control, that we can get good at a particular task, but that doesn't
Ikaw may
actually
magbit-bit
translate
sa
over
ana.
into the other parts of our lives. And the reason for that is because we haven't really understood the science of self-control until now. And there have been a couple of, in my opinion, revolutionary studies that have completely changed our perspective on self-control. In fact, they've shown us that self-control doesn't really exist. And paradoxically, it's through understanding this that we will learn the best scientifically validated methods to improve our self-control. And if this is so revolutionary, why haven't you heard about it, and why aren't people talking about it? There are a couple reasons for that. The first is really simple. It's actually really, really hard to understand because it completely changes our perspective on self-control. And the second thing is that the discovery isn't sexy at all. In fact, it is quite disappointing. And at the same time, now that we know this, now that we literally understand where self-control originates in the brain, we can actually do things to significantly boost our self-control. So let's start by understanding what we do know about self-control. So a couple thousand years ago, a group of yogis sitting in India basically discovered something, that awareness precedes control. And when I teach this principle, either as a psychiatrist or a meditation instructor, I kind of point out that, okay, if you kind of go to the dentist and you get something numbed up, you can't feel your mouth anymore. And if you can't feel your mouth anymore, you can't control your mouth. Water will spill out, you'll talk talking like this, you can't really understand what people are saying, people can't understand you, right? So I sort of use this kind of analogy that, okay, if you get something numbed up, you can't control it anymore. And it turns out that while that analogy seemed really good, it's actually wrong, and it goes way deeper than that. In the 90s and 2000s, there were a group of psychologists who tried to figure out what is going on with self-control. What is it really? Because the basic idea that we had at the time was that self-control is essentially like a personality characteristic. It's a part of who you are. And if you've got the right genes, and if you've got the right upbringing, that if you're 20 years old and you've been raised with discipline, then you will continue to be disciplined. We thought it was a fixed aspect of who you are as a person. And this group of researchers basically discovered that it's not a fixed aspect of who you are as a person, it's a diminishing resource. It's not something that's on your character sheet as a trait. It's actually like a mana bar that can be depleted over time. And this sort of makes sense, right? Because we kind of know that on some days we're able to control ourselves, but on days where there's a lot of stuff going on and we have to exert a lot of self-control, when I've had a really rough day at work and I want to yell at my boss and I restrain myself all day, at the end of the day, I can't bring myself to eat a salad. And I just order a pizza and I sit down and like, I'm just done with the day. So they basically discovered that the more self-control you exert, the more it depletes. And once researchers had figured out that it is a diminishing resource, naturally the next thing that they looked at is what diminishes self-control the most. And what we basically figured out is there are two things that severely, severely drain your self-control. The first is emotional regulation. So if you spend a lot of time suppressing or regulating your emotions, if you want to tell someone to go screw themselves and you have to hold that in, then you will diminish your reserve of self-control. That's number one. The second thing which reduces self-control is stress. Because let's be honest, stress is bad at everything. Stress is bad, stress is bad. Stress is going to reduce your self-control. But they literally found that. They found that people who were in more stressful situations had a lower reserve of self-control and could not exert that to do healthy behaviors. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because stress makes everything worse. And then there were a group of researchers that showed up and said, okay, what can we do to boost self-control? And no surprise, meditation helps us boost self-control because you should meditate more. If you meditate, you will be more in control, more in control. But then, like I said earlier, this gets us back to the original problem where if I had the self-control to meditate every day, I wouldn't need to meditate every day. If I could force myself to sit down, then I wouldn't be in this problem in the first place. And this is where we come to the truly revolutionary research. So a group of scientists sat down and they sort of figured out, okay, so we know that emotional regulation and stress reduce our capacity for self-control. Then they asked the question, what's going on in the brain when emotional regulation and stress actually drain our self-control? Which part of the brain is actually being drained? And they used something called an EEG, which measures the electrical activity of the brain. And they discovered something really fascinating. That there's this part of our brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. And the anterior cingulate cortex is responsible for monitoring internal conflict. And what they essentially discovered is when we stop monitoring our internal conflict, our capacity for self-control goes out the window. So this was kind of a weird finding because it sort of suggested that self-control
Yeah, okay. Second kong na-learn about self-control.
Isn't really a thing, but simply that what self-control really is our capacity to monitor internal conflict. And if you sort of stop and think about it, you'll notice this, right? Because when do we exert self-control? We only exert self-control when there is an internal conflict. So generally speaking, in human behavior, I have an automatic impulse. I want to eat a slice of pizza. And then there is another part of my brain that says, actually, we should eat a salad. And in that moment, when you exert self-control, there's actually a conflict between one part of you and the other part of you. That's literally why we call it self-control, because you are trying to control yourself, and the self actually wants to do something else. Now, we've assumed, based on our subjective experience, that there's actually a control aspect going on, but it turns out that that's actually not the case. It turns out that what these researchers discovered is as long as the conflict is being monitored, we will be in control. But the moment we stop monitoring the conflict, we lose all control. And you may have actually noticed this, because it sounds kind of weird, right? But just like pay attention to your particular circumstance, where you fight a battle in your mind. And then as long as you're fighting that battle, you're still sort of in control. But the moment that you stop paying attention and the moment that the battle disappears is the moment that we lose control. Now, this is where we think that the reason we stop monitoring the battle is because we've lost or we've won, right? That's what we sort of assume. The battle is over, that's why I stop paying attention. And this is completely natural because the two happen really closely together. We stop thinking about it after we lose, right? And then we kind of give in to the behavior. But it turns out that it's actually the other way around. It is that when we stop monitoring it, that's when we lose the battle. And you may have kind of noticed this, that in the back of your mind, you're kind of arguing with yourself, but you sort of like, and then you stop thinking about it. And before you realize it, your phone is in your hand and you're kind of waving it around and you're scrolling in bed. Before you realize it, you've turned on the light or opened up your tablet and you've started to watch something. And even working as an addiction psychiatrist, when I talk to patients about their relapse, they don't relapse after a long and drawn-out battle of like resisting. You kind of give up in your mind, and you kind of stop thinking about it, and then you're engaging in the behavior before you even realize it. And so this is exactly what the researchers discovered, that conflict monitoring is self-control. But hold on a second, Dr. K. What about all this stuff around emotional regulation and stress? Because we know that those two things deplete self-control the most. But you're telling me that simply monitoring conflict is self-control. How does that relate? And it turns out that it fits perfectly. So if we look at emotional regulation, what are we literally doing in emotional regulation? We are suppressing our internal emotions. I want to tell my boss to go screw himself. But instead of paying attention to that, I'm going to shut off that part of my mind. And shockingly, when I shut off my internal awareness, I shut off my ability to monitor conflict. And as I shut off the part that is responsible for self-control, shockingly, my self-control worsens. So emotional regulation fits perfectly because literally what you're doing is shutting off that conflict monitoring part intentionally so that getting pissed off doesn't take control and actually cause you problems, right? So that sort of makes sense. That as we suppress our internal awareness, we will lose the capacity for self-control. What about stress, though? So stress is also something that fits perfectly because when we are stressed out, literally what our brain is doing is externalizing our attention. When you are stressed out, you are not thinking or paying attention to this. You are paying attention to the problems outside that are going to screw you, right? So when I'm stressed out about a test, I'm not paying attention to the internal environment. I'm thinking about the test. When I'm stressed out about my boyfriend or girlfriend breaking up with me, I'm not thinking about how I feel. I'm thinking about how do I prevent this disaster. So now we see another really interesting point of evidence, which is that when we are stressed out, literally what our brain does is externalizes our attention to solve the problems that cause us stress. And shockingly, when I externalize my attention, what do I stop paying attention to? My internal conflict. So we actually see that this old research about emotional regulation and stress causing reductions in self-control fits perfectly with this model that conflict monitoring is literally self-control. And so what does that mean for you? A couple of really simple things. The first is that the more of your emotions that you have to suppress, the worse your self-control will get. And this kind of makes sense because if we look at addiction psychiatry, the more emotionally turbulent someone is, the more likely they are to use and relapse and not control their behavior. The crappier your life is emotionally, the more likely you are to give into bad behaviors. Binge eat, comfort food. When do you need comfort food? When you need comfort. When do you need comfort? When there's badness in here. So the first thing that we've got to do is learn how to alternately regulate our emotions. So this can be everything from going to therapy to journaling to taking walks. But what you need to understand is that you cannot improve your self-control if you are emotionally turbulent. That fixing the emotional turbulence is the same thing as improving your self-control. That's number one. Number two, what about stress? Because this is where we could say, but okay, Dr. Case, are you saying that as long as I'm stressed out, that I won't be able to control myself? And that's where the science really comes in and says not quite. Because I'm not saying that you have to solve all of your problems, but instead what you need to do is re-internalize your awareness. And this is the mistake that we make. When I'm focused on solving problems, let's say I have a final coming up and I'm afraid to fail it, what I start doing is stop paying attention to myself. I stop paying attention to my hunger signals. I stop paying attention to my fatigue signals. I stop paying attention to everything in here because I'm so focused out there. So it's not that you need to fix all of the problems in your life to gain self-control. It's that you need to re-internalize your awareness. So anytime you're feeling stressed out, try to take 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes to just check in with yourself. Sit down or go for a walk and just ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? Just take a moment to literally re-internalize your awareness. Just pay attention to what's going on. And then you may say, but Dr. K, that won't be enough. Even if I pay attention, how do I start doing healthy things? And this is the revolutionary and confusing thing, is that the two are actually the same. Literally all you need to do is increase awareness of the internal self. As you increase that awareness, you will be boosting that conflict monitoring system in the anterior cingulate cortex. It's not that self-control is separate from awareness. It's that the two are actually exactly the same thing. So as long as you can pay attention to your internal signals, literally your self-control will improve because the circuits are one and the same. What we subjectively experience as self-control is different from what is actually going on in the brain. So a good example of this is if I'm nervous, I will say I have butterflies in my stomach. But I don't literally have butterflies in my stomach. It is just the way that I subjectively experience nausea or anxiety or whatever. And instead, there's actually discrete neuroscientific mechanism. And so if you kind of stop and think about it, the solution to getting rid of butterflies in your stomach is not to remove the butterflies in your stomach. It's to address what's actually going on in the brain. And so even if you accept that, you may be saying, okay, so I need to internalize my awareness when I'm stressed out. But then what? How do I exert self-control? And this is exactly why this is so hard to understand. You don't actually need to do anything else. That self-control and awareness of your internal state, specifically awareness of conflicts within you, is literally the same thing as self-control. And that sounds really confusing because subjectively, that's not really what it feels like, right? And this is exactly what the problem is as we try to figure out how do I control myself, we don't find any good evidence-based answers because none of them exist. And now we actually come full circle to meditation. Because why is meditation so good at improving self-control? Because when I'm doing meditation, all I'm doing is paying attention to my breath. That's not controlling my breath. It's not resisting my breath. It's just paying attention. And that's literally because these two functions are the same in the brain. So it turns out that the yogis actually had it right all along. And even what I was saying earlier about awareness precedes control is actually incorrect. It's not that awareness precedes control. It's that awareness is control. And so the last thing that you can do, which I know sounds crazy, is actually meditate. But even in this way, you don't have to do a formal meditation practice. Literally, the muscle of self-control is the muscle of conflict monitoring. So all you need to do is pay attention to your internal conflict. And the more that you sit with that conflict, the more you will be able to exert control. And the last thing that I'll leave y'all with is if you even kind of think about the times in your life where you exert self-control, you kind of are aware of that conflict, and then you kind of have this idea of just do it, right? You kind of make up your mind and you just do it. And so if we sort of stop and think about it, then it becomes easy. You're like, yeah, I just woke up one day and I just did it. And so everyone on the internet is telling you to just do it. But that's hard because you don't know how to just do it. And that's the beautiful thing. If you look at every person who has decided to just do it, all of that just doing it was preceded by a very high awareness of internal conflict. And if we're talking about someone who overcomes an addiction, what we literally do in psychotherapy is become aware of that conflict over and over and over again. And then one day, an addict wakes up and becomes sober. They just wake up and they just do it. And so if you want to do that for your life and develop self-control, what you really need to do is actually not just do it. You're trying to solve the wrong problem, which is exactly why it doesn't work. Instead, all you need to do is pay attention to your internal conflict. And the longer you can be aware of it, the more in control you will be.
games look like shit, and I want to know why. Cards, cafes, stores, toys, plushies, apparel, movies, anime, home goods, stationery, snacks, food, glue sticks, shampoos, this, that, thing. Game Freak have their grubby little hands in literally everything. And when I say Game Freak, yes, I mean Game Freak. Dating back to 1996, Blue and Red are the first instance of the existence of the entity that is Pokemon. And guess who created and owned it at the time? That's right, Game Freak. Or more accurately, Satoshi Tajiri and Ken Sugimori. In 1998, 2 years later, Game Freak, Nintendo, and Creatures, the company that made the Pokemon trading card game, came together and co-founded the Pokemon Company. Since then, and to this day, each of those three companies own 33% of the franchise that is Digimon. Sorry, Pokemon. Arguably one of the most advantageous business transactions of all time, with Pokemon now being, say it with me everybody, the world's largest franchise, about to top $100 billion in revenue. That's almost double of the next highest franchise in Disney and exactly 50 NBA jams. So I ask you, once again, and not for the last time, why do the games look like shit? They are the main thing that is Pokemon. The cards, merch, and anime, they all draw inspiration from each new video game release. The animes are animated beautifully. Even the spin-off underfunded animes like Pokemon Concierge, which has been highly praised for its cheerful atmosphere and its visuals. And I should know, I've watched it twice and I cried both times. Even the Pokemon cards, some of them look so beautiful that people take them and they put them in protective little tiny glass houses. And it's funny because those same people, when you mention how bad the games look, will start throwing stones in those same tiny glass houses. So can we have an honest conversation about why everything else Pokemon branded is of such high quality and production, but the video games are a laughingstock outside of the Pokemon fandom community? Yeah, pause. I'm gonna stop you right there, buddy. This video is sponsored by Nixie, and if you can believe it, I've been looking at Switch accessories for almost a decade, and these joypads are easily some of the best third-party accessory for the Switch that I think I've ever seen. I was immediately blown away by the quality of all their products, both in the way they shipped them to me that had really nice packaging. They sent me pretty much their whole product range, including this GameCube-inspired keyboard. You can clearly tell this company cares a lot about the way their buttons feel and sound across all their products. 22 different RGB lighting modes, and I found some user-created modes in the app. The keys are hot swappable, and this little dot matrix screen up here, you can program it so easily. I threw the U Joy-Cons from my logo on mine. Moving on from there, they also do a wireless controller. This thing feels like an Xbox Elite controller, but you can use it on the Switch and PC and Android and iOS. You know, sometimes like button layouts can get confusing, like Xbox and Switch, they look different. Well, guess what? You pop off the faceplate, you can just move those suckers around wherever you want. So that thing is awesome. And then we take a look at the Hyperion 2 wireless joypads. They have such a nice ergonomic design that makes it really comfortable to hold. You have programmable back buttons, Hall effect sticks for zero drift. All of those clicks are so satisfying and addictive and crisp. I can't get enough of them. They have 6-axis gyro motion sensing. They also have removable faceplates. These RGB lights are so easy to change. This one, you just press one button and then you can scroll along to change the colors. This is a hell of a way to spruce up your Switch 1 if you plan to keep playing it. There'll be a link down below for Nixie and all these products. Go check them out. Thank you, Nixie, for sponsoring, and thank you guys for supporting my sponsors when I have them. Okay, yeah, you keep talking. What is it? Pokemon sucks? Man, this guy doesn't shut up. You know, I heard he skipped all the story in Arceus. Personally, I'm excited for the new game. They brought back Tepig. Pokemon fans will give you 100 excuses when you bring this up about how as long as the games are fun, the visuals don't matter. Yeah, I mean, that is inherently true. I mean, look at Witcher 3, the Switch version. That is and always has been Nintendo's own mentality. You know, as long as the game is fun, doesn't matter what it looks like. But how long are we going to use that Nintendo expression to excuse poor game development? Pokemon Legends Z. Oh, don't you leave that comment. Oh, but Game Freak are doing their bestest westest, and the game, it's not even out yet. Yeah, I know. I'm sure that impression of you definitely prevented the comment you were about to leave. It's not just about ZNA. It's about Game Freak's approach to video game development since they made the Switch to the Switch. So we have a lot to look at. And in the words of Ash Ketchum himself,
you can't undo what's already been done, but you can face up to it.
That's an actual quote. See, I did research. You didn't believe me. I gotta get ahead of this a little bit because I have talked about Pokemon graphics a bunch here on this channel, on my podcast, and whenever I bring it up, people often say the same things. And one of them is, he's not a true Pokemon fan. He skipped all the dialogue in Arceus, so you can't take his opinion seriously. I'm not sure how skipping this very bloated story correlates to my eyes functioning, but it seems worth it to try and get ahead of this, so I'm gonna let you know now, I am actually a Pokemon fan. And I'm not super hardcore, like I haven't made it my whole identity. I don't have a tattoo, I don't own a Lucario fursuit that I wear on weekends. Look, I wish I had both of those things. One of my first games was Red. Who could forget playing Gold as a kid? And so many others. In fact, I played pretty much every mainline Pokemon game. Never played Black and White, because it was just that age where I was falling out of Pokemon before I decided to fall back in. And at this point now, I'm just waiting for a Black and White remake, because everybody says it's the best one. The first time I went to Japan, half the stuff I brought back was Pokemon merchandise. We even made sure to get a reservation at the Pokemon Cafe, and let me tell you, when Chef Pikachu came waddling out to ask me if I liked the meal he cooked, I almost wept like a baby. It was so wholesome. What I'm trying to say is, I do love Pokemon. But if you were to put a gun to my head and ask me to name a single character in any Pokemon game outside of Professor Oak and my mom, you may as well pull the trigger. You think when I was a kid playing Red for the first time, I gave 2 squirts a piss about the story? No, I was too busy gambling on slots for a Polygon and riding up and down this one shoreline because I wanted 100 Master Balls. Hell, while I was scripting this video, Kim sent me a text saying she just woke up from a nap dreaming about an old Pokemon toy she had where the Mewtwo had tits. We're locked in on Pokemon. Why does it have tits? I'm making this video because I do care. Because 25 million people is a lot of people to buy a video game. But a lot more people bought games like Breath of the Wild and Animal Crossing. And Zelda isn't even in that Wikipedia list of top grossing franchises, which means, yes, it's below NBA Jam. And remember when Breath of the Wild came out and no one would shut up about it, how it was a new, breathtaking, innovative, jaw-dropping, inspiring new video game? Don't we want that from something like Pokemon? I feel like these games always get a pass because they manage to sell so much, but it should be higher, shouldn't it? We as fans, do we not want the Breath of the Wild of Pokemon? Or are we content with the... Okay, this guy's making some incredible points, and he has me completely sold, but I actually just watched his last podcast episode where he said some of this stuff in the episode. One of the top comments was, the games only make up 10% of Pokemon's total revenue, which... Fan of the podcast, and I love him. I love that they left this comment because it also allowed me to get ahead of this one because what the piss? 10% of $100 billion, by the way, is still around $10 to $15 billion just for the video games, which is a whole Grand Theft Auto franchise. And I would just like to remind you, again, something I've already said, the merch, the anime, the new cards, all the new merch, those come from the video games. So if the video games currently are only making 10% of the revenue, imagine if we made the video games, good. That would then trickle down through all the new merch, plushies, and all of that, and boost those revenue and sales even more. I guess I just don't understand the argument that the Pokemon company makes too much money to try or bother with the video games anymore, when the video games are still making more money than 99% of the rest of the gaming industry. All right. Anyway, back to this chump. Let me get to the point. I know Pokemon fans hate when other Pokemon fans complain about how the Pokemon games look. And if you try complaining this time around about how Pokemon ZNA looks, they'll say, but it looks so much better than Scarlet and Violet. And well, yeah, but that's a really low bar. And Game Freak are the ones that set that bar. This game isn't anywhere near the industry standard and looks worse than anything else Nintendo is doing, which is already being scrutinized for being behind the times. Saying that this is better than the previous amounts of terrible is like going to your job every day and just intentionally being the worst you could be, just messing everything up, the worst employee this company has, but then like a year later you actually start trying and you do a little bit better and expect to be praised for being slightly less shit. You could pick just about any first-party Nintendo game and compare it to ZA, even the soon-to-be re-released Wii U game, Xenoblade X. And it would be clear that this is not a Swish hardware issue, but an issue of a developer who is struggling to create games post the 3DS. So let's not do that. Let's not compare it to those other Nintendo games. Let's do what Pokemon fans like to do and only compare it to Pokemon's own games. A nice little echo chamber for us to play around in, see how our voice sounds. Hello? Hello? We saw in Scarlet and Violet that Game Freak struggles to create competent game worlds that aren't full of glitches, bugs, and low-resolution textures, terrible frame rates, and assets stuck together with spaghetti and crazy glue. You just blink at this game wrong and you'll be falling through the floor. But I think the biggest offender here is that resolution. At the time, fans said, Well, at least it looks better than Sword and Shield. However, comparing Scarlet and Violet to the Pokemon ZA trailer, the new game does look a lot better at first glance. Now, I want to say, to Game Freak's credit, looking back at their other Pokemon reveal trailers, all these trailers seem to be rendered within the game. They hide absolutely nothing about the way that their games look and play. So that gives us a very good, trustworthy bar that Pokemon Z and A is an in-game rendered trailer running on the hardware. And if this is true, I will say they've done a fantastic job at fixing resolutions and draw distances. All those jagged edges are completely gone. And I think that's why people look at these two images and think that this new one is so much better. But how did they do that? I think it's pretty clear if you really look at this, specifically the buildings. A way they managed to bring down those jagged edges is by just not having anything that would create a jagged edge. They've flattened out almost every texture and model, specifically all these very similar looking buildings throughout the city. In all three of the other Pokemon games on the Switch, Game Freak designed the buildings with intent and purpose. The architectural designs of the buildings, they had depth. They had balconies, awnings, brick, window sills, glass textures, concaves, you know, like intentional designs, man. Scarlet and Violet, for example, was set in Spain, and they clearly took those buildings as inspiration and went to work sculpting them, and they would look beautiful if you could see them through the jank. But you know, at least the thought was there. Here, almost every building has the same window, just Control-C and Control-V all over it. It's honestly giving Lego. I mean, they're just rectangles with stickers stuck to the front. It's also the same tactic they did use in Scarlet and Violet for the environments. And I broke this down in my review of that game. They took one small section of texture and just copy-pasted it everywhere, hoping you wouldn't look at it for 2 seconds and accidentally notice. Incredibly lazy game development, and completely voids all personality and life from a city that's based on a city that is so filled with personality and life. Despite some people thinking that this is Tokyo Tower, it's actually the Eiffel Tower, and this city bears resemblance to the city of Paris. In fact, if you take yourself on Google Street View and you plop yourself right about here, I think I found the street that the trailer is actually set on, which is pretty cool, and credit to Game Freak that I managed to do that, and then I could tell what they were going for. But where Paris had these beautiful iron metal balconies, in Game Freak's rendition of that, they have these beautiful iron metal balcony JPEGs. What? I'm actually quite speechless. This is not the way they did it in any of the other games. This is new. And also, Game Freak, by your own logic, if you were just going to copy-paste it, you could have just made one balcony and then copy-pasted that a bazillion times. Why this? I don't think they're even that lazy. I think there is something else going on here. In Scarlet and Violet, despite how intentional those buildings were, from a distance, or really even up close, but definitely from a distance, they look like the low resolutions and lack of any kind of anti-aliasing. They shimmer and shine, but like in the worst way. So Game Freak, not knowing how to fix this very basic issue, found yet another gameplay development workaround for Pokemon Z and A. Flat, lifeless buildings with a picture of what a nice building could look like glued to the front. Now you might say, does it really matter, Wood, what a building looks like in a video game? And I would say, yes, if it looks like this, I'm gonna say something, but also, this whole game is set in a city. When you go to New York City and you want to take in the sights, what do you look at? Is it the rats in the street? Is it the weird people dancing on the train that you try really hard not to make eye contact with because you're scared? No. It's the buildings. I'm going to be looking at these the whole time I play, and they look like this, but some of them have some sort of depth to them. But clearly, this is also just one window design that has been copy and pasted several times. What are these windows supposed to be? Or even the ones next to them? Like, I don't really know what I'm looking at. But what I do know is my favorite kind of balcony JPEG is the balcony JPEG that has a flower JPEG on top of it. I mean, that just really ties the room together. But not a single window in this entire trailer has any kind of reflection at all, or presents itself as an actual window. They all just look like Game Freak Googled the word blue and used the first thing that came up in Google image results. Even these huge shop windows, which if we go back and we look at the actual Paris street, you can see a lot of these buildings have little storefronts under them. So this would be a really nice opportunity to fill this storefront window with a store. But nope. Just a JPEG. We even get a close-up of this building as we climb all the way up like the world's ugliest elevator. They're using a JPEG for the whole building, but they couldn't even use a high-quality JPEG. Like, they couldn't even render in the JPEG. Who is designing these? Oh, at least it looks better than the other Pokemon games, does it? Does it? Because 6 years ago, in Sword and Shield, the windows actually had reflections. They weren't true reflections. They didn't actually reflect anything that was happening, but it was serviceable, and it got the point across. And honestly, looks pretty nice. But I guess this is yet another way that Game Freak found to pare down development, because they even did away with those in Scarlet and Violet. In fact, the only window I could find in the entire Scarlet and Violet game, and I had to ride around that sucker for way too long, by the way, I forgot how janky it was this one. And I don't even understand what the hell is going on up there. It's just very confusing. Yeah, hi, me again. Sorry, I'm filming this in the future after I recorded a ton more gameplay for Scarlet and Violet. I actually didn't remember how bad this truly was. These characters popping in and out, seemingly at random. It's not even distance-based. And by the way, when I say disappear, I literally mean disappear. You can't go and find them again. They're just erased from the game. This video isn't supposed to be about Scarlet and Violet, but my god. Also, I was recording footage for the video and I saw this, and I never noticed this before, but it's because I'm so obsessed with Windows right now. Another cheap tactic that Game Freak does in their game is they have this placeholder unrendered in city that looks terrible from a distance, but the placeholder city doesn't have lights in the windows. So when you get a little closer to the city, it pops and fully renders in the actual city, and because it's night, the lights all just turn on. They didn't even make an unrendered in version with lights on for the nighttime, because why bother? But that window, and subsequently the building that it's attached to, brings me to another very good point. All three of these games have something in common. Well, graphics. So I guess two things. They all have one nice building. Each game has a central location building that looks night and day better than any other structure in the game. Like in Scarlet and Violet, it was the school, which looked fantastic, and then in Arceus, it was whatever that big building was in the village that they did stuff in. I don't know, I skipped the story. And my assumption here is that it's a tactic to kind of trick our brains into thinking the game actually looks nicer than it does, because the building that you might have gone to most frequently actually didn't look that bad. And for example, in Pokemon ZNA, we get in this trailer a shot of the main character picking out of the 3 Pokemon, and there is this, quite frankly, gorgeous structure behind him. Just wonderful stonework, designs, there's arches, there's depth, vines and grass. There's possibly even a reflective window in this sucker. This clearly demonstrates that Game Freak can design buildings like this. They don't though. They either just, I guess, don't care about the rest of the game, or maybe they don't have the time, maybe they're being rushed, or maybe it's all of these extra designs and details just makes the game look a little worse because it's more things to render. I mean, God forbid we render in a JPEG of a building, let alone an actual building. They don't want to bog the game down with anything that might hurt the overall presentation. A great example here of what I'm looking for, bare minimum, from these games is to look at Scarlet and Violet again, but in 4K. The low resolution of this game on the Switch is not the Switch's fault. These games are very basic. It's just that Game Freak doesn't know how to optimize or build a 3D world. That's not a controversial thing to say. We've seen it countless times in other games on the console, and I know the console can't do 4K, but this is what the game looks like when you fix the resolution. Oh, that didn't really help my point. No, I'm kidding. It's a night and day difference. And you can see what they designed. And this is probably what it actually looked like on their end when they made the game on a PC before they had to scale it down somehow for the Switch. So rather than trying to figure this out, they just took out anything in the game that would look bad in low resolution rather than fixing the resolution. If you look at the streets of Pokemon ZNA as a whole, it gets its point across and you get what they're going for. But as soon as you look at any one element on its own, the flaws start to show. The fact that they still can't design anything with a high enough poly count to actually make it round, that no NPC in this game has a shadow. And that goes for most objects too, except this awning, based on everything else in this picture, why does it even have a shadow? Yeah, I just wanted to take one more look at this awning with you guys. Why is it here? There's plenty of shop fronts, even in this same image and other images, that don't have awnings. What is the point of the awning? Why is it only on 3 of the 5 windows? What is it covering? There's no tables, there's no chairs. Also, why is the awning like half a millimeter thick? One gust of wind and that sucker's gone. When Sword and Shield revealed and I had an issue with the trees, I became the tree guy for a minute. Everyone was like, what is the problem with the trees? What's wrong? Who cares about the trees? I feel like this time I'm going to be the window guy or the awning guy, crashing out over windows and an awning. And once again, it does seem like NPCs are incapable of moving around the game world. They just stand there lifelessly. I mean, this was the case in Pokemon Arceus as well. Even 60 hours into my playthrough, this old lady is still sweeping that one spot. I'm sorry, honey, if it ain't clean now, it probably ain't gonna be. In Scarlet and Violet, there were some characters that had animations, like a little jig, and it looks like all those have been stripped out. And then there were even a few NPCs that would walk around. But due to the game having absolutely terrible draw distances and crazy
Stream di ay. Kuan pa din eh.